Okay, I'm letting them all in and we are recording.
Well, good morning. I'm seeing everyone kind of pile in here, so I'm just going to give it 5 more seconds so everybody can make sure everything's working, their audio and whatnot. I am Sarah Pearson, and welcome to our Government Affairs Committee meeting for June. We definitely have a great speaker with us today, and seeing the amount of attendees for this meeting and those of you that I know very well, there's probably going to be some great questions that are going to be asked as well. On behalf of our Chair of Government Affairs, Jim Now, who is with us as well, welcome to our meeting. We hold this meeting once a month. It's always the second Thursday of the month at 11:30. We always have very, very informative speakers and very intense topics that we discuss. This is the committee that works extremely hard on creating the legislative agenda each year, and we will be looking into doing that in the next couple of months. So for those of you that are new on this committee, welcome, and I hope to see you on a regular basis moving forward. I'm going to have Chastity say a few housekeeping items, and then we'll get back to our program, and I'll introduce Brandon, our speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a couple of housekeeping. If you're not familiar with Zoom, which I'm sure by now everybody is, just to let you know, Sarah will be monitoring the chat box. So if you have any questions for Brandon, you can put them right into that chat box. And I'd like to let you know that this presentation is being recorded. You can see the recording of this presentation later on the Boca Chamber's YouTube channel on our events and resources playlist. And if you have any questions regarding anything else, just shoot that in the chat box to Sarah privately, or you can put it to everyone so everyone can see your questions. Or if you have a question for me, you can shoot it in there for me as well. So enjoy the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Chastity. So I thought this is really a great topic. It's a big win for business. You know, the major updates and improvements on the Boca Raton sign code. That issue has been a part of the Chamber's legislative agenda, again, led by our chair, Jim Now, for many, many years, making it easier for businesses to do business, to put a sign out, to not have to get bogged down into some of the bureaucracies of some of the other committees that the city has, that the signs have to go through. And so this is a massive win for all of us, that there has been a pretty big update and changes made to the sign code process as well. So Brandon's here to share what was officially voted on and approved on May 27th, I believe. But it was many years in the making. So I'm excited to have Brandon. I am going to read his bio. And before I read his bio, I'd love to see how many people on this call. You can either raise your hand on the video or put a little your hand up in the reactions down at the bottom. How many people know, without looking it up, the capital of South Dakota? Yeah, me neither. Had no idea. I knew it sounded something French, but it's Pierre. And I'll tell you what made me think of that. I'm going to read Brandon's bio, and then it'll all come together. So, Brandon Schatt, he's the Development Services Director at the City of Boca Raton. He oversees the planning, zoning, building, permitting, inspections, and code enforcement for the city. Additionally, Brandon's more than 17 years of public and private sector planning experience, mainly in South Florida and the Treasure Coast, includes consulting for dozens of cities, senior level planning positions with Palm Beach County, the city and county of Denver, Colorado, and the town of Miami Lakes. Additionally, he's represented a number of neighborhood groups seeking to shape zoning and planning decisions affecting their communities. His career has included extensive transportation planning efforts, consensus building, which I've seen he's exceptionally good at that, and new funding sources for multimodal mobility, modernizing land development regulations while streamlining development review processes and creation of new form-based zoning regulations. He holds a Master of Arts in Geography. That's why I asked about the capital, because I figured if anyone knows the capital of South Dakota, it would be Brandon, which he kind of didn't know, but did. It's a longer story, but he does hold an arts degree in geography and planning from the University of Toledo and a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from the University of Rio Grande. He's a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. He resides in West Palm Beach with his wife, Michelle, and his two little kids, 2 and 6 years old. And without further ado, Mr. Brandon Shad. Oh, I think you need to unmute. Got it. Yes.
Okay. So I'm putting my PowerPoint on full screen, which means I can't see any of you right now. So
You have to share your screen. So just click that share screen button at the bottom.
Okay.
Click on the icon of your presentation. And then put your presentation in presentation mode. There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. First time doing a Zoom call. So again, thank you all for your hospitality. My name is Brandon Shad. I'm the Development Services Director here at the City of Boca Raton. Today I'm going to be giving you a little bit of information about the new sign code that the city recently adopted on May the 27th, just a couple of weeks ago. So I will get right into it. So as you all are aware, aesthetics is a major issue for the city of Boca Raton. One of the major things that we do try to focus on, and it's to a benefit of all of us. It's I think it's fair to say a contributing reason why a lot of businesses want to be in the city is our high aesthetic standards. That's something that signage has a lot to do with. So I thought it was interesting. I went to Wikipedia and just thought I would see what they have to say about Boca Raton. One of the things that it's on Wikipedia is it says Boca Raton has a strict development code for the size and types of commercial buildings, building signs, and advertisements that may be erected within the city limits. The strict development code has led to several major thoroughfares without large signs or advertisements in the traveler's view. So that's something that outsiders think about when they think about Boca Raton is our high aesthetic standards. So that's something we want to, obviously continue and enhance. The city's own comprehensive plan has something to say about signage as well. It says the city's sign ordinance, initiated in the late 1960s, gives the city a unique, uncluttered look that limits commercial intrusion into landscaping and streetscapes. So again, just to give you an idea of what the city's priorities are and what we had to be thinking about as we initiated a new sign code, something that would build upon and improve upon what the city has been doing for decades. So I thought this picture was interesting. This is not in Boca Raton, but the point here is that we all, including business, benefit from signs being more like this and less like that. So that's basically what we're trying to get at with the sign code, but we were trying to also do it in a way that is easier to get through, less bureaucratic, and just maintains high standards without taking too much time, basically trying to get good stuff approved quickly. And so that's what the goal is, and I think we've achieved. So a little bit about why we decided to write a new sign code. One of the major reasons was changing the legal landscape. So there was a US Supreme Court case back in 2015 called Reed versus the town of Gilbert, Arizona. And essentially what that legal decision said was that signs cannot any longer be regulated differently based on what the subject matter of the sign is. So you can't say, well, this is a political sign, so we're going to have this set of rules, and that is a sign for a special event, so we're going to have a different set of rules. Essentially, every sign code in the country did that before, and now we have to deal with a new legal reality. So that's one of the reasons that we decided to embark on this. Additionally, there was the issue of the Community Appearance Board's role in signage regulation. And I suspect that at least some of you on this call are familiar with the Community Appearance Board and the role that they've played in sign regulation in the city over the years. That role essentially has been reviewing every single sign permit, almost every single sign permit, which obviously takes a lot more time than if staff, for example, was approving sign permits. There was also some dissatisfaction with aspects of the signage regulations, which I can get into a little bit. And there was just generally a need for modernization. For example, there's just been new types of signs that have come into existence since the previous sign code was written. So it was just time for an update. So the Community Appearance Board and the City Council had what was called a roundtable meeting, a joint meeting, back in February of 2017. This was about 2 months after I had joined the city. And so we've been at this for quite a while. But what came out of that meeting was some specific goals. One was to streamline the sign approval process. Another was to allow greater design flexibility for higher quality signs, to better coordinate the design of signs with building architecture. And then there were some very specific issues that had come up over and over and over again. Disputes about the number of tenant panels on monument signs, how the city would treat logos that may not otherwise comply with the specific regulations, versus the desire for brand consistency, particularly for national brands that wanted to put their logo obviously on their signage. And additionally, the number of colors that are allowed on signs. So I'll go through how we've dealt with each of these issues. So just an overview of the sign ordinance itself. Basically what it does is repealed and replaced the previous sign code. It has repealed a separate document called the Community Appearance Board Sign Design Criteria. So just a quick note about that. Basically, we had two sets of regulations overlapping and sometimes conflicting, these two documents, the sign code and the sign design criteria. So we have repealed the sign design criteria and incorporated all signage regulations into one place, which makes it more user-friendly and less confusing and more clear about how the different requirements interact with one another. We've made some changes to the approval process for signage, which relates to the streamlining, and I'll get into some details about that. And we've made some significant substantive changes to the way signs are regulated in the city. So to go through some of the process changes. So just a regular old permit for an individual sign, whether it be putting up a new sign or changing the face of an existing sign or whatever. In the past, this says now and proposed, but it should say previously and new, an individual sign permit would essentially always be reviewed by the Community Appearance Board. Again, this takes extra time. The board would exercise their discretion, so it was a little bit unpredictable what they might or might not approve on any given night, depending on maybe what members decided were there that day or were not there that day. What has changed with this is that now staff will be approving most individual sign permits, except where there's a specific higher level review required, and I'll get into that a little bit. Currently, a master sign plan for a commercial property, previously, this was completely optional for somebody to do. That would be approved by the Community Appearance Board. Now it is going to be required. So that is also approved by the CAB under the new regime. But the reason for doing this is to basically, if you have a shopping center or whatnot, that basically you could come in and say, this is what we're going to do for signage for the entire property. And we approve that all at once, and then the individual permits are easy, just comply with that, and that's a streamline. Sign variances, those are relatively rare. They were previously go directly to the city council, and now the community appearance board will be doing those approvals. So basically what the former model was that the CAB would review every sign permit and exercise design discretion with respect to size, placement, colors, etc. If the CAB were to impose a requirement that the applicant didn't agree with, or related to deny a sign altogether, then that would often lead to an appeal to the city council. Not fun for anybody to be in that situation where the city council is looking at sign permits. It was also a source of uncertainty. So you didn't know for sure until you got to the board whether your sign was going to be approved. So the new model is that if you submit a sign permit that meets the baseline regulations, it can just simply be quickly approved by staff. There's certainty. You know, if you comply, you're going to be approved. There's no discretion. So certainty is, as we all know, important in the business community. However, the CAB is empowered to approve signs that differ in certain respects from the baseline regulations. If you choose to want to go outside of those baseline regulations, you have the ability to ask the board to approve that. So that allows for some flexibility. So those basic things have achieved a streamline of the approval process. So I want to go through a little bit more detail some of the process change. So one of the ways that you can differ from the baseline regulations is through a process called an alternative identity sign design. So this can be a sign that's attached to a building, or it can be a monument sign. And again, that does go to the CAB. So basically, these are things that, you want to place the sign in a way that's different from the way that the code reads. You want something that illuminates in a different manner, and so on. These are things that the code doesn't specifically contemplate, so you can go to the board and get those things approved if you choose to go that direction. These are some of the things that can be waived through that process. So if you have a sign that has more colors than the code allows, or like I said, is in a different location on the wall of a building, those sorts of things, you can ask the board to approve that. So that gives the board a chance to make sure that even though you're going outside of the baseline regulations, that it is going to be something that is aesthetically pleasing. Another process, which is similar, is called an architectural sign. But the difference with the architectural sign is, one, that it's only for monument signs, and two, that it really has to prove that it goes above and beyond in terms of design. It's something that is going to be unusual, something that's going to be something you look at and say, wow, that is a really nice sign. It's not just the typical sign that you'll see anywhere. So again, that's reviewed and approved by the Community Appearance Board. And as the code section there I've cited says, it's creative and otherwise well designed and constructed of materials superior to those typically found in the industry. So with an architectural sign, you can get some pretty significant incentives. You can get a bigger sign than otherwise allowed. You can get a sign that's a higher height than otherwise allowed, closer together on your property, and even more monument signs than otherwise allowed, that type of thing. You can also, the baseline regulation for tenant panels on a monument sign is that you can have up to 4. So with an architectural sign, you can increase that up to 6. So you can see some of the other things, number of sign faces up to 4 instead of 2, so on. So again, talking a little more about the master sign plan I mentioned earlier. So the previous regime was that approval of what they used to call a criteria was optional for a commercial or industrial complex. And the new requirement is that it's required for any non-residential development with multiple occupancies. Again, this is simply designed to ensure that the signage program within one development will all be coordinated and reviewed and approved upfront, so that the individual signs can just simply be shown to comply with that master sign plan. So we have streamlined the approval process. We have greater design flexibility, coordination of sign design and building architecture. So then we move on to some of the specific issues that I mentioned earlier. The number of tenant panels, as I mentioned, currently the new sign code, there's a maximum of 4 unless you get approved as an architectural sign, and you can go up to 6. Logos were a really big issue before, a lot of disputes, a lot of appeals to the city council, and a lot of hand-wringing over it. So basically, what we have written into the code is that you can use a logo as part of the sign. The size of the logo can be 1.5 times of the combined height of all the sign copy. So if you have, say, 2 lines of copy on your sign, you can have a logo as part of the sign that's 1.5 times the combined height of those two lines. If there is no copy other than the logo, you can go up to 1.5 times of the maximum letter height for your logo. If you want to go beyond this proportion, and you can, then that's one of the things that you would be going to the Community Appearance Board for. But if you're not, then that is just simply a permit that's approved by staff. Talk a little bit about temporary real estate signs, which have also been a significant issue. There was talk about lowering the size of allowed real estate signs, but ultimately it was determined that we will maintain the existing maximum size, which is 16 square feet. Essentially, you have a 4x4 sign. However, the new code will prohibit V-shaped real estate signs, and that's what you're seeing in the picture on the screen here. So you're not allowed to do that. These temporary real estate signs have to be, basically the 2 sides are back to back, they're parallel. So you cannot have these V-shaped signs. The next issue was colors. So the new code will impose a maximum of 3 colors, which does not count black and white and does not count the building wall color for signs that are on a building. If you want to have more colors than that, you can go and be reviewed and approved by the Community Appearance Board. We did something a little bit different for these multi-tenant monument signs that have tenant panels. So essentially what we did is we said if the tenant panels take up half or less of the sign, then you use the 3-color limitation on each of the tenant panels, and then the 3-color limitation separately applied to the rest of the sign. So this gives a little bit more flexibility on colors if again, the tenant panels take up half or less of the sign. So we dealt with number of tenant panels, we've dealt with logos, and we've dealt with colors. So a little bit about the process we've gone through to do this. As I mentioned before, we had the roundtable meeting of the Community Ordinance Council back on February 27th of 2017. We took our draft sign code for review by the Community Appearance Board on April the 16th of last year to the Planning and Zoning Board a couple of days later, back to the Community Appearance Board on July the 9th of last year, and we held a City Council workshop in September of last year where we kind of worked out some of these last remaining issues. Finally, we had the ordinance reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Board back on December 5th. We would have had this adopted a little earlier if it hadn't been for COVID, but nevertheless, we did get to the City Council finally on May 27th of 2020. It's been a very collaborative process. In addition to working with all of these boards, we have worked with some of the individual property owners that wanted to be involved, some architects and sign designers, and so on. We've been in many, many, many hours of meetings. And I'm proud to say that ultimately when we got to the City Council last month, and in any of the hearings, we didn't have anybody opposed to the new ordinance. So I think we have made, I'm sure not everyone was to the point that they agreed with everything, but I think there was nobody that wasn't in agreement that we had produced a product that's much better than what was in the code before. So we're very happy about the collaborative process, and that we essentially, we had no opposition at the end of the day. So again, the new sign code, it does streamline the approval process. Does consolidate all of our regulations into one document. It sets more precise standards. It uses clearer language and meaning. Improves regulation of properties based on size. So essentially, it recognizes the fact that larger properties are going to have more signage, whereas the previous code did not do that. It incorporates sign types that are not contemplated in the current code. For example, the previous code did not deal with things like menu boards at drive-throughs. It did not deal with the signs that you see on parking garages that show you the number of spaces that are available, things like that that just didn't exist at the time that the previous code was written. It deals with the Supreme Court decision that I mentioned earlier, and other legal compliance issues. So a little bit about the benefits to Boca Raton businesses, as I see them at least. Again, the streamlined sign approvals, providing greater certainty about what will be permitted, again, if you're within the baseline regulations. And then outside of that, some flexibility to have other types or signs approved, especially for superior quality signs. We dealt with the issue of logos and with the process to allow logos that have multiple colors, which some brands, including national brands, do have. I guess maybe I'll stop for a second and just give you the example of the Learning Center. I don't know if you're aware of the logo, and the Learning Center is like a childcare company. Their logo has, I don't know, 15 colors in it maybe. But, so we have a process to allow that type of thing. Allows us to look at the context and how big it is and that sort of thing to make sure it fits aesthetically. The type of thing that just requires some additional discretion and judgment. It does maintain the city's high aesthetic standards and encourages investments in superior quality signs. So again, that's what we see as benefits of this effort to Boca Raton's businesses. And that is my presentation on the sign code. Obviously, there's lots and lots of detail that we can talk about if anybody wants to. But again, I thank you for your time, for your invitation, and I'm here to try to answer any questions if I can. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brandon. I did want anybody that has questions, they can either just unmute yourself and ask away, or I see that Sharon wrote a question. Does this ordinance cover residential real estate yard signs? Did that change? What's the rule on size for the residential real estate signs? Where can they find that information?
Yeah, so I can provide the details. There isn't a lot of change to the residential real estate signs. Essentially, it's the smaller type of sign, and it is allowed for the whatever period that the property is for sale or for lease. So there's no other than that. There's not a time restriction on it.
Okay, and how about open house signs, the temporary, just during open house? Has anything changed on that? Any rules?
No, so that would be covered under the real estate signs. So open house signs are allowed, and I think typically those are up for during the day that the open house is happening. It usually doesn't garner too much attention from code enforcement anyway. Sure.
Oh, everyone's get their Amber Alert. Okay, so how do you, this is a great question. Sharon, you're just on it today. This was a question actually that I remember when they were passing, or when the council voted on it, they brought up political signs. How are you going to deal with that? I know that there's some rules, right? that have been put in place for political signs, certain amount of days before the election, things like that. So how are you, what's changed, and how are you maintaining that the campaigns are following those rules?
Sure. So it gets a little bit complicated because I mentioned because of the Supreme Court decision that we can't say this is the subject matter, so you're under a different set of rules. So every property has an allowance for temporary signs for what we call non-commercial. So it could be a political sign, or it could say really almost anything, as long as it's not offensive. You can essentially say almost anything you want on the signs. But we do allow more of those signs on residential properties during the 45 days preceding an election day. So there's that. So basically you can go from having one non-commercial sign on a residential property to having 5 during that period of time, that 45 days leading up to an election day. Again, it could say, happy birthday, mom, instead of saying, vote for this candidate, but it is, specific to that period of time. And so, yes, I mean, the enforcement of sign rules during that heated time prior to election day is challenging for code enforcement, and it will, I'm sure, continue to be challenging, but it is something we take very seriously, and we try to maintain the city's aesthetic standards during that time as, just like any other time.
And political signs are not allowed on any city property except for polling places, or what are the rules when it comes to that?
So there is an allowance in state statute that basically says that at a polling place or at a, I believe it's including early voting places. So you can have, there's a, I think it's 150 feet from the entrance to the polling place or something where you're not allowed to have it, but outside of that, you are allowed to have larger signs and as many signs as you want, essentially, including in the public right-of-way within a certain distance of the polling places. So that's a very unusual circumstance. Most of the time, you cannot put a sign, say, in a median or on a swale or something, but in the immediate vicinity of a polling place, you can do so. I think it's in the statute, it's 30 days, up for 30 days leading up to the election day.
All right, well, we've got that coming up, so good that we all know. I know that the city quickly reacted when the pandemic, when the state of emergency happened and the closures happened, for restaurants, quickly reacted to allow restaurants to put, sandwich signs out and things like that during the shutdown. So there's a question from our chairman. How do the new rules work for the banners and street signs that restaurants are using right now due to the recent closure? Is that a temporary thing that did you guys write in a temporary allowance for this type of signage to happen? And if so, is that going to be eliminated soon, or what does that look like?
So we have relaxed our enforcement on some of those issues to try to help the businesses, obviously, that have been, were closed for a certain period of time and have been put under lower occupancy thresholds through the state orders. So we're essentially just relaxing enforcement for a limited period of time. I don't know exactly how long that will last. Probably as long as those, reduced occupancies are in effect.
Well, thank you for doing that. I know we got a call very early on from one of our great members, Cinnaholic, which is, they're a very small cinnamon bun company that husband and wife owned, great people. And of course that is, they're kind of tucked in and with the closures and everything. And it was really important that they get something out on the street that says we're here and we're still serving. And we made a quick phone call to the mayor. He called you guys and made it happen so fast and made it happen for all the restaurants very, very quickly. So, it was very pro-business, and we appreciate that. Another question, are there any figures yet on how much faster the new approval process is versus when all the approvals had to go through CAB?
So not yet, because any permit application that was in before the ordinance passed continues under the old rules, and anything submitted after that are new rules. So since the ordinance has only been in effect for about 2 weeks, we don't have that yet. But I do expect it's going to be a significant speed up on approval of those permits.
Absolutely, it will. I sit in all those meetings and all of those appeals in the city council meetings. I look forward to not having to sit through those as
Yes,
often.
I don't think anybody likes those.
Another question, has the municipal code been updated to reflect the new Chapter 24 regulations? And if not, where can we get a copy of the ordinance?
So I would be happy to email anybody a copy of the ordinance. They just want to provide me their email address. Municode has not been updated yet. It takes them some time to codify. An ordinance of this size, it might take them up to a couple of months.
All right. I know we have a few sign companies in the house. Are there any additional questions or comments? Last chance. Well, thank you very much, Brandon, for taking the time to go over this with us. What I think we'll do is we'll get the link, and Chastity will send an email to everyone that attended with the link to the code, the changes and whatnot. And other than that, so tomorrow, I do want to tell this group especially, tomorrow is the deadline to qualify for the August elections. That's all of our constitutional seats, the commissioners, sheriff, the supervisor of elections, tax collector, property appraiser. Those are all seats that are up for re-election. And tomorrow's the deadline at noon, and there are a lot of seats open. There's also a few Beach and Parks District seats that are open, and our school board seat, Frank Barbieri's seat, and he does have somebody running against him. So there's a number of extremely important seats that are up for election or re-election in August. So obviously our PAC, our Political Action Committee, Blue PAC, is gearing up to get started on that process where we send questionnaires to all the candidates based on what this committee has given us of priorities, of legislative priorities that we've put together. We ask those questions of these candidates. We will then be introducing or interviewing those candidates and then making endorsements. So keep an eye on that whole process. Encourage your friends and colleagues and family members to vote. I know that the supervisor of elections has made it quite easy to sign up to vote by mail. There was something sent out to everybody last week where you simply just fill out your information, and she's already paid for the stamp and everything for you to send it back. So please, with everything that's happening, we don't want to forget about how important it is for us to be active in that space as well. So are there any announcements that anybody has? I know usually we go around, so if there's anything going on anybody wants to share before we say goodbye. All right, so next Tuesday is the supervisor of elections. Wendy Sartori-Link will be our speaker for economic development at 3 o'clock. And Brandon, again, thank you very much for taking the time. And we look forward to seeing all of you in person at some meeting soon. So thank you.
Yeah.